truth is powerful. It's even more powerful when the truth is about you, what you are, and how you came about being.
A little bit scared because the way I saw whites acting with blacks and treating blacks so mean, I wasn't sure how they would treat my sister and brother.
Our family grew up during a challenging time in American history.
But with the biracial siblings that we had was really not my concern. I wasn't concerned about that because we never looked at each other as being half brothers and half sisters.
In consideration of growing up in a poor black neighborhood and being exposed to biracial conditions was very troubling to me in an early age. But to some extent, because of the prejudice that existed and what I was exposed to, kind of changed my thinking and my exposure.
I felt like I had to establish myself, and I wanted to establish myself as black. I did not want to be half white because that meant shame. I was born in 1957 in East Texas, a town called Longview. And that's very near the Louisiana state line. So it's a fairly small town. I was born to a single mother. And when I think back on my earliest memories of my childhood and what it was like during that time, I was happy. As long as I was surrounded by my family. We had a very large family, lots of cousins, aunts and uncles, and we were very, very poor, but I did not necessarily understand that we were poor because, all I remember is just being allowed to play. We could run barefoot up and down the street. We knew what the boundaries were, and as long as we stayed within those boundaries, we had a lot of freedom.
There's nothing unique about Charlotte in my biracial status. There's nothing unique at all about Charlotte and I. In fact, the multitude of biracial children in our generation were the product of a liaison between a black or mulatto, in the case of our mother, woman, and a white man out of wedlock. Financial situations a lot of times was the reason for this union.
During the 1960s, our country was faced with troubles of the civil rights, and our family was very unique. We grew up during the most troubling time where white were fighting against black and black against white. But yet our family grew up in a biracial environment which saw nothing but love. We as children back in the 1950s and 60s did not understand the difference between black and white.
Well, my concern in growing up in the neighborhood that was considered to be more or less an area that was poverty-stricken, that we didn't really have a whole lot during that time. But actually, I was not concerned about that. I didn't think anything about not having. It wasn't that most blacks had something during that time anyway. So most black families during that era wasn't privileged to have a whole lot of financial means, or they lived in two-story house, or they live on the other side of town. So most blacks during our time, they pretty well was comfortable and living the way that they lived. So it wasn't so much that we felt that we was poor, although we had to struggle, but the happiness was just being with one another, and the happiness was really finding joy in making your own toys, or playing with your neighbors and stuff of that nature.
It's a funny thing about being poor, black, and exposed to racial tendencies from each race, white and black, that can really depress a young person. But if they have mentors and they have experiences that differentiate between the social issues, it can change your thinking. And that's what I faced in a number of situations. To explain a situation, I was exposed very early to a religious environment, and it focused on changing my perception of people and the principles in which they expressed. One of the things that shaped my thinking and my perspective was that one of my teachers by the name of Mrs. Wilson exposed me to all of those things on both sides of the spectrum. Not only what poor kids experience, but what privileged kids experience. And as a result, it prompted in me to desire to educate myself and expose myself to all of the entities that develop personalities, to dispel all of my fears, and it prompted me to set my sights and my goals on the ultimate of accomplishments.
Hello, my name is Mary Taylor, and I'm the oldest child of Louella Burton. She had 5 children, and I was the oldest child, and I was her assistant. I had to help her with the siblings that I was in care of every day on a daily basis. During the 60s, as stated, it was civil rights tensions and a lot of cruelty done. And my siblings being the color that they were, I wasn't sure how they would be accepted in the community. So it was my job to take care of them every day and every evening, because that's what I did as being in charge of the house, helping my mother while she worked, and she did housework, and I had to take care of the home and my siblings in her absence. And that I did. I took charge of the house, made sure their clothing was clean, made sure they had food to eat, and I protected them. And at that time, I felt a little bit scared.
There were some friends that I had that lived across the street that were close to my age, and I would play with them. So life was good. I was happy. I didn't know that anything was different about me or my circumstances until I was around 4. And I remember one of my good friends lived across the street, and I was over there playing with her one day, and I did something to upset her. She called me, she told me to go home. She said, I can't play with you anymore. I don't want to play with you anymore. You ain't nothing but a white blankety blank. I won't say on this tape.
I can remember as a, 3 or 4 year old child, this woman picking me up and telling me how cute I was. Then looked me dead in the eye and said, but you're not gonna amount to shit because your mother's a bitch. That was hard on us growing up with so much animosity exhibited towards our mother for what she chose to do with her life.
I did not know what the word meant that she called me, But the way she said it to me, I knew that for some reason that meant I wasn't good, that it was something wrong with me. And I remember my feelings were so hurt. I went home, I kept it to myself, but I suddenly became aware there was something different about me, that I wasn't accepted or acceptable to all people. So from that point on, I was always aware of where I was. I became aware that people were looking at me, because understand the neighborhood that I grew up in was very low income. We're talking shotgun houses on cinder blocks. Everybody was poor, and it was all black. It was no integration. I did not see a white person in my life until I went downtown when I was 6 years old to buy supplies to go to school. But I was surrounded by nothing but black people. I didn't know that I was different. But then I became aware that I was different. And in that awareness came shame. And you know, for a child to feel ashamed was really hard. It was very hard. And I went on to school. Everywhere I went, if I had to go into a new environment, I felt like I had to establish myself.
The foundation of our family was based upon love, and that's all we needed. And as a young boy, I could remember watching the TV and seeing all of the people being killed and black people being denied the human rights. But yet we children, both black and white, grew up together with a loving mother who only taught us to love, and we loved each other. So I didn't grow up thinking that all white people were evil. To think that, I would think that my family was evil because we were black and white. I think our family represents what America is trying to become.
My concern was more or less my mother, on the ridicule that, you know, she was getting, and the talk that, you know, she was getting throughout the neighborhood. So, and those are things that would bother me the most. When going to school, they would, you know, talk about my mother. Say, oh, that's the boy that got the hair white, you know, brother, the hair white sister, and his mother is dating white men. So in that time, again, that was taboo. But my concern was more or less on my mother's side, that I was concerned about her, and no individual is comfortable with someone talking about the mother or the father. So being poor was never a concern of mine, simply because we was happy with, you know, what we had. We may have been poor, but we didn't really not enjoy eating, having toys for Christmas and stuff of that nature. So most of the criticism, probably 99% of it, come from blacks. We wasn't privileged to be with the Caucasian race, so we didn't hear anything from them. So our hurt, or my hurt, didn't come from the other race. You know, our hurt come from our own race. But you know, but I understood that, and I always have been pretty well a religious person, and my prayers got me through. As I prayed for family members, prayed for my mother, pray for the family. So I don't really have any bad feelings about growing up in a area that was considered as being a poor and ran down type place, because, you know, most blacks did. So my concern was more or less, you know, my mother and the ridicule that, you know, she was getting.
So they were young and innocent, and they were friendly. When people would come up and say, "How you doing? You're such a cute little girl. You want to go home with me?" I would just tense up. I didn't know how to tell them to respond. I didn't want them to be friendly to them, because I felt like they would be taken advantage of. So I was very, very afraid for their well-being. I was a little overprotective, but in a way I'm glad I was. This protected them and kept them secure, that they knew someone was looking out after them and that they didn't have to worry for their welfare. So it was just a difficult time.
Because understand, during that time, blacks were not allowed to marry whites. So already you got that shame because your parents aren't married to each other. So I did everything to earn my black card back then. I learned how to dance. I could, doing the things that you saw other people in your community do, I made sure I could do. I could dance. I got taught how to fight because I didn't want anybody thinking that, oh, that little white girl over there, I can bully her, I can beat her up because she's gonna be scared of me. None of that was happening in my life. I earned my black card at a young age. And when I was going to the 7th grade is when they forced integration of the schools. So I went from an all-black school, I got bused across town to a white school, along with a couple of other black communities. So again, I had to reestablish my identity in a new environment. And I wanted to make sure people knew that I was black.
I felt like a dreg in a dreg society.
So in junior high school, we didn't call it middle school back then, it was junior high. I was exposed to, for the first time, going to school with whites. And then a whole group of black students that got bused in from an area, we referred to it as across the river. So I had to let it be known, my identity. And I remember this little kid, he was very, very little, and he had buck teeth and horn-rimmed glasses, little white kid. And he used to just love following me down the hallway between classes going, nigger, 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 you ain't nothing but a nigger, nigger. But he was so funny looking that I didn't get mad at him. I just started laughing, and so I called him Little Nigger. And when I started calling him Little Nigger, then he left me alone. But, pretty much established my identity. And this was back like in 1971, 72, and afros were big. And my hair, it was a lot lighter. At the time, I was more blonde than I am now. I've got a lot of gray in here. But I worried my mother to death until she took me to a salon and cut my hair off. It was short all the way around. And at night, I would sit up with bobby pins and I'd put all this wave gel on it, and I would do little pin curls all over my hair. And then in the morning, I'd take the bobby pins out and take a pick. And I had an afro because I was trying to establish, I know what I felt like on the inside, that I was black, but I didn't look it on the outside. So I was trying to make the inside match the outside. So I pick that hair out. I have a nice fro, pat it down, perfect. But before the day was over, that fro was split down the middle. And so I had to make them into Afro puffs. And in the warmer weather, I tried a couple of times, but I had to give it up. I would lay out in the backyard and try to tan my skin because I didn't want to be so fair. I was trying to brown up, but I never could get that brown tan. I would burn and peel and just get maybe a little bit of color, but I never got that tan I was after. So I kind of gave up on that. But the whole point that I'm trying to make is my identity at that time was so firmly entrenched in Black culture. I had my Black card, and that's what it was. And I would fight you if you called me white.
I wanted to belong to a group.
And we were blessed because we had that chance to know that, yes, we can live together. But it's on the foundation of love and knowing that everybody is somebody. So my greatest fear during that time, I worried about my little sister. I was worried about her more than anything because we were so different. And our family was looked upon as being unique and different. So during that time, James Brown came out with the song Say It Loud, I'm Black and I'm Proud. Well, it was that moment that I realized that my skin was not black enough. I can remember as a little boy being sad because I really couldn't say it loud, I'm black and I'm proud, because the coloration of my skin was lighter. So for several years during that time, I felt less than black. That hurt me more than anything else, is that during that time, we and our family joined together to work together and had a mother who just wanted only the best for her children.
As a grown man at work, I was subjected to remarks about my mother. One guy said, "Man, how could you take that?" I looked at him and said, "I've been taking it my whole life." And I think that is the reason why there was so much effort by my mother's children, me, Charlotte, Mary, Lacey, Bert, to be the best we could be, to prove that we are worthy. All of us you could depend on. All of us are people of our word. Maybe that had something to do with it. Maybe we had to prove to that lady that was picking me up, telling me that I wouldn't amount to anything, that I am worthy, that I will be something, that I will amount to something.
Siblings and being so concerned about how they will be treated at school, in the yard, or whatever was my full-time occupation. And the fears come from the fact that I lived and experienced so much racism. As a child, I went to the Arlene Theater, and I used to have to stand in line till every white person was served at the concession stand before I could get ice cream. I didn't understand back then the cruelty and the rudeness of people, the way they would talk to you. I didn't want my siblings to have those experiences. And so I just didn't allow them to mingle much with many people. I protected them. I carried them everywhere I went and watched. But it seemed a little strange. But for some reason, I felt like I had to do it for their sake. And it's sad today that we have not advanced. I see killings on TV. They're just killing the black men, and with no remorse, and it's nothing done about it. So I wasn't wrong to be afraid. I had the right instincts, and for that reason, My siblings are here, grown, and have graduated school, and I'm proud of what I had to do to protect them.
No matter what the racial issues were, I knew and I felt very strongly that I could overcome any of the racial epithets as well as the racial slurs and the racial inequities that I was faced with. To give you an example, one of the things that I was faced with very early as a teenager, I went to the public library to check out a book. Being a citizen of Longview, I thought that I had a right to go to the public library and check out books. When I arrived at the public library, I was told because I was a minority and a black minority that I could not apply for a library card. And without a library card, I could not check out books. But being exposed, as I said, to an environment and to mentors who had the authority to go through the process of securing that library card, I went to that person and gave them my experience. But as a result of that, they carried the situation to the authorities that secured me the library card. Although I was black, it was a segregated environment. It was a ban for black students as well as parents to secure a library card from a public library.
My concern was more or less, my mother and the ridicule that, she was getting, but she was one of the best person that we ever had. She kept everybody in her home. It's not a person that we knew that that needed a place to stay, that she didn't open up her doors to us. So although that she was living the Christ-like life by opening her doors to strangers, and she didn't turn nobody down. So, I think God blessed us all. I was able to finish college, and now I am a minister. So I think my upbringing helped me to be what I am now. It makes me a better preacher, makes me a better person. It gives me that sense of actually stick-to-itiveness, even irregardless of the situations. You always stay with what's right, and if you stay with what's right, which I always have had interest in doing what's right, and I think that's the key. It doesn't really matter for as the color. I think that's something that was, again, taboo back there, but I didn't really get caught up into my sibling, one a half brother again, and a half sister, one's white and one's black. We all grew up, we all slept in the same bed. I was the big brother, and everybody looked up to me, thought I was cool, and so they looked to me to kind of, set the standard. So hopefully that I've done a good job with that. But my concern has never been race. My concern has been treatment, how one is being treated, and I think my mother was treated unfairly by predominantly African American people, whom that she helped and stuck her life out to do so. Those were the days, and you can't take those days back. There's some good and there's some bad, and there are some indifferent days. But nevertheless, the sum total of it all, we are who we are, and God shaped and molded us in the things that we have gone through. I think it was a providential power of God that we're able to do what we do, and why we have gone through what we have gone through. It was all for a reason, and don't look back and throw no pity party over what's been transpired. You can't change the past.
Who just wanted only the best for her children. Here, 60 years later, my greatest concern here in 2021 is that our country have not learned anything from what we've gone through, where people have died for. I'm disappointed. I'm disappointed as a whole with many people, not by color, but by their ignorance. I'm disappointed even in our young black youth who still do not respect their black sister. I'm disappointed that we called each other the N-word when we ourselves don't want anyone to call us that. So we have a lot of work to do, both black and white. If this nation is going to ever come to be the nation that the founding fathers said that we would become. So that's just my overall experience. I think we were American back in the 1960s. Our family was what America should be.
But over the years, as time went on and maturity set in and culture started to change, there were more interracial couples because when I grew up, you know, there were maybe one or two others that were like me, my brother, and another, you know, couple of kids that were biracial. But we were kind of it. And so over time, with maturity, with understanding, with just becoming more of who I am, I embraced my white side. So now I fully see myself as biracial. And I don't feel anymore like I used to feel that I had to prove myself. I had to behave in a certain way, show you I was down to be accepted. Now I feel like I can be totally who I am, and I'm comfortable with that. And I think that is so important now because unfortunately, you know, it seems that we're going backwards. And that's a bad place to be. We need to be aware because race, you know, you got people don't want to teach critical race theory, don't want to talk about race. Well, whether you choose to talk about it or not, it's there and it permeates everything until you can get to a point of total acceptance within yourself. It's always going to be an issue in society, but within yourself, it should not be an issue.
Charlotte and I took different paths, but we came to the same conclusion of loving who we are, both the white and the black. But I must say, my journey wasn't easy. Her journey wasn't easy. There was times in my life when I just wanted to be a part of something. And I identified with groups that people that may have looked like me. You know, you grow up with, what nationality are you? And there were some groups that I identified with, and then I learned their causes. I learned their struggles.
When I was a little girl, I remember watching the Miss America pageant, the Miss Universe pageant with my oldest sister, Mary. Mary was quite a bit older than me, maybe about 14, 15 years older. But we did a lot of things together. In addition to watching the pageants, we used to dance. We moved the furniture around in the living room and put on old ballet albums, and we make up our own ballet dances. And I had a natural ability. We were so poor, I couldn't afford to take lessons, but I had a natural ability. And when I was in high school, I became very much involved with theater, doing musical theater, and I was a viewette. So I became very limber, and boy, I could dance. I got to pat myself on the back. I could dance. And one of the plays that we did, one of the high school musicals, the choreographer took an interest in me, and he wanted to choreograph a jazz routine for me and he convinced me to run for Miss Longview. Now, I think up to that point in time, I was aware of only one young black woman who had competed in that beauty pageant. And she was, I think, a second runner-up. So since I had grown up watching beauty pageants, you know, every little girl kind of want to be Miss America. But, you know, being a poor black girl, never really did I consider it as a possibility. But when his name was, I can't remember his name, Michael Tudd, and he convinced me to run. And I did, put a lot of time and effort into it. My mother, my sister, all very supportive, everything that I needed for that pageant. And it cost money, and we didn't have money, but everything I needed, from evening gown to business attire to swimsuit, I had it. And I remember when we were doing rehearsals, there was the last rehearsal before the pageant. You would think all the contestants had been identified and were present. They brought in this other girl. I guess she was like a professional pageant person. She did a lot of pageants. And she lived somewhere, not in Longview, not even near Longview, but they brought her in to compete. And she borrowed one of my shoes, because it was the dress rehearsal before the pageant. And she didn't bring shoes, so I let her borrow my evening shoes, and she broke the strap. Now, part of me was thinking, Lord, don't tell me she did that on purpose. And then someone spilled fake eyelash glue on one of my dresses. You know, I didn't want to feel like I was being sabotaged, but things were kind of going awry right at the last minute. But we got it together, and I got everything replaced. So I did the Miss Longview pageant, and to my surprise, I got second runner-up. And one of the pageant judges was a judge for the Miss Texas pageant. And he came up to me afterward and asked me if I would consider competing in the Miss Texas pageant. But he wanted to suggest that I do a little bit more work on my dance. My dance was pretty good, but there were some things that I could have improved upon. So I go off to college. I went to the University of Texas in Arlington that fall. And I joined an auxiliary organization to Alpha Phi Alpha fraternity. And I later, in the spring, I pledged Alpha Kappa Alpha sorority. But before I pledged the sorority, I was very, very active with the auxiliary group. And the Alphas were responsible for the Miss Black UTA pageant every year. And that particular year, they didn't have anyone to compete in the pageant to represent the Alphas. And they were desperate to find someone because they put the pageant on. They needed to have a girl representing them. And they knew that I had pageant experience. So they started on me, Charlotte, please, Charlotte, can you run? And I was very reluctant because I didn't know, all of this representing the black student body of UT Arlington. And Roots had just come out. And there were some mad black folks, about that movie showing how slaves were really mistreated. So I had all of that kind of in my mind. But I went ahead and did it. And I was really nervous. I thought, I don't know how this is going to go over. But I did it, and I remember one of the things, we had to have a talent, and of course I had my dance number. I did a jazz routine to The Wiz, and that number I did when I ran for Miss Longview, I pulled that out, and that's what I performed for Miss Black UTA. And we had to have African attire, and I didn't have anything. So my sister at the time, she sold Katani Fashions, and there was one outfit that was kind of a leopard skin pajama thing, and it was a scarf, leopard kind of scarf. So I used that as my African attire. That was the closest thing I could get. But did the pageant, And I won, to my surprise. I won it. And I remember being on stage when they called my name, and I could hear people booing. And some people got up and walked out. Kind of hurt, but that was one of the reasons why I was kind of reluctant to do it. But, after a while, I thought about it, and I said, no, I had every right to do that pageant. And I had every right to win. And then later on, I remember someone contacting me from the Dallas Morning News, and they came to my apartment and interviewed me and ran an article on it. And then sometime later, I was contacted by, can't remember the name of the show. It was on Channel 8 in Dallas. The host was Michael Brown. His wife is Sandra Brown, and she's a well-known novelist. But he interviewed me for that show about what it was like to be representing the black students at University of Texas at Arlington.
While my sister was going through the rejection of winning Miss Black University of Texas at Arlington, I was being radicalized. And I'm glad it didn't last long. It's a dark side of me. When you become radicalized, you put blinders on. Even though you feel you're guided by an injustice, you in turn start to create injustices towards society. You start disliking or hating for just what people are. And that was innately hard for me to do. So the path of radicalization was not the path that I wanted to pursue.
I mentioned previously that I was raised by a single mother. And because of that, oftentimes I did not focus so much on who my father was. But I had a general idea or a belief, we were told, my brother and I, who our white father was. But, there was never any real proof. We had some interaction with this gentleman and just sort of accepted the fact that he was indeed our father. I think the neighbors also assumed that this gentleman was our father. He was a white man who did a lot of business in the black neighborhood, and he and my mother were friendly toward each other. Matter of fact, my mother's cousin worked for this gentleman. So we just kind of assumed, and we were told that this gentleman was our father. And he was from German descent. But as I got older, it became more and more important for me to know the truth. I became a mother. I became a grandmother. And oftentimes, my daughter would have, I remember one time she had an assignment from school to do her family tree. And we could only do half of the tree. So it really bothered me that I didn't know for sure, who my father was or anything about the family. So one year my husband asked me what I wanted for Christmas. And his brother had joined Ancestry and had done his DNA and their mother's DNA. So I said, well, I think I'm gonna bite the bullet. I think I want to get my DNA done. And it took weeks. I can't remember exactly how many weeks to get the results, but when I clicked on my results, I was expecting to see, obviously the African part, but I was expecting to see German, because I was fully believing that this gentleman who was of German descent was my biological father. Instead, it tells me I'm 52% Great Britain. And I'm like, this ain't what I was expecting. And then it matches you to other people who have also gotten their DNA done through Ancestry. And it tells you what their relationship is to you. And the very first person that showed up on my relationship list was an elderly white man. Last name was Porter. And I'm like, oh boy, what's this? And I called my brother, Dwight, because he and I always grew up believing we had the same father, the same gentleman. And I said, well, Dwight, it ain't who we think it is. And it was kind of sad, because then there was doubt. Were we full brother and sister? We always believed, because we were so close, so similar in our likes and our attitudes. And then to think that we might have different fathers, it was kind of sad. Then I became obsessed trying to figure out, now who is this person, this Porter? And after some thinking and remembering my mother talking about a friend that she had for years, his name was David. She only said David. So I didn't know if his last name was Porter. So I kind of looked on Ancestry, the record of this first cousin of mine, the elderly white man, and looked at his family tree. And further down his family tree, his uncle was the youngest in the family, and his name was David. So I said, I bet that's the David. And so it took me a while to get the courage to reach out to this first cousin of mine, because I didn't know what his attitude would be toward me. He was living in East Texas, in an area, I don't want to just stereotype people, but the majority of whites in that area, in his age group, didn't have a very warm opinion of blacks. So I thought, well, what is he going to do if I reach out to him? Is he going to accept me? Is he going to hurt my feelings? So I talked it over with my brother Dwight, and I called my oldest sister Mary. And I told her what I was thinking about doing. And at first she was like, no, don't do it. Why stir up stuff? But then she called me back like within a couple of minutes and said, you know what, I think you need to go ahead and do it, because obviously it's important to you to know, where you come from. And she said, if it is the David that I remember, he's a good man. She remembered him. She had met him. And he had helped my mother through some really, really hard times. So she said, if David is your dad, he was a good man. So that encouraged me. And I through Ancestry, I sent an email to this cousin. I can't remember what his name was, because everybody called him Sonny. And that's what I started calling him after I got to know him. But I sent him an email and introduced myself and said, I don't mean to disrupt your life in any way. I'm just looking for answers, and told him what I had discovered. And it was just amazing that this cousin Sonny was deep into genealogy. He had been tracing his family's lineage for a long, long time. He had also spent 40 years outside of the United States, and he was very accepting of diverse people and diverse beliefs. So he and I connected. He knew exactly who I was from the beginning, because he had met my mother. But he kind of led me on for a while, just giving little hints about, yeah, well, it might be David. And I, finally I said, it has to be him. I said, because DNA don't lie. DNA is the truth. So he finally, came clean, and he said, yeah. He said, I met your mother. But I didn't say anything about Dwight. because we weren't sure about Dwight. He was going to send off his DNA sample to see if we had the same father. So when Dwight got his results back, it did match. And we told Sonny, you got another first cousin. And he and his wife invited us over to meet them, and we met another second cousin. And they were so warm, so accepting, and it really touched my heart that he went to their family tree. Now granted, let me back up a little bit. I got to tell y'all this. The Porters in East Mountain, Texas, were very, very proud of their Confederate background. My family on my father's side fought for the Confederacy. They were captured. Some of them were prisoners of war, but they did not like black people. They were proud Confederates. But our father, David, was different. And although he never acknowledged me and my brother publicly, he and my mother, I don't know what their arrangement was, but they were in each other's lives from before my birth until his death in 1999. And he provided for us. I had spoken previously about running for Miss Longview, and my mother somehow came up with everything I needed. Even when on the night of dress rehearsal, when I had my shoes destroyed, my dress messed up with glue, the very next day, we were at this department store in downtown Longview called Riffs. And my mother replaced my shoes, and she got me a much better dress. It was a Mike Benet original pageant gown. And I did not find out until I met Sonny, my white cousin, and his wife Martha, that Martha worked in the Mike Benet factory. And so my dad told my mother, take her to Riffs, get her a Mike Benet original pageant gown. So he was there. He provided, always behind the scenes. I still don't understand, and I never will until I cross over and meet him face to face, why he did not ever want to be acknowledged. But he and my mother had their agreement, their arrangement throughout his life, and he provided for us. And so that was the greatest gift for me to know. And Sonny, being really into genealogy, he updated the Porter family tree. And next to David, because David, our father, was married when he was young. When he came back, he fought in World War II in Italy. When sometime after he came back, he got divorced. He never remarried. And as far as anybody knows, he doesn't have any other children. So Sonny updated the Porter family tree. All those Confederate folk. But on that family tree under David, he put my mother as David's wife and my brother and I as the children. So that was the greatest gift that I've received in a long time.
I find that the thing that bothers me the most now is that I cannot believe my mother didn't come clean before she died. I said, hey, Dwight, this is your dad. We've always known of him. He was just her friend. Well, when I got to meet members of my white family, one of my white first cousins said, well, our grandmother was a bit racist, and maybe they wanted to keep that. Oh, well, she died when I was 18, around 1977. And I think my father died in the 90s. And my father died in the 90s, so there was plenty of time. And then my father died in the 90s, and my mother died in 2002. Why didn't she ever say, hey, this was your father? What was it that made her keep that to herself all those years? We'll never know. Everyone has died that could tell us. But I can't help but wonder, did the old Confederacy linger, even though my father stayed, my mother and father had a relationship all those years, but the white Confederate couldn't shed the fact that he had biracial children, that he couldn't embrace being called father by us? What was it? What was it? That may not be it at all. I could be totally wrong, but you can't help but think that. Or wonder. I guess we'll always wonder. But I'm glad that the journey ended up the way it did, and I don't know if I would take another route. Because knowing who you are is important, and we know who we are exactly. DNA is pretty exact. So the 60% white that we are, we pretty much know what we are, where our white side is from. The same as knowing our black side. Some of the great historical areas that our ancestors in Africa are from. The great history of our white side. So there is always a lot to love about all of your races. If you're biracial, if you're triracial, if you're mixed with 4 or 5, there's things to love, because everyone in the world is unique. Everyone has a great story. Every race has a great story. Every race has great meaning. There's no one race that is elevated above the other. We're all a great creation. And we are all important. I often wish I had a mom and father environment growing up where I had a dad at home. As a child, I would lay on the ground and look up at the sky and imagine that if I could attach a rope to the sky, I could hang on and then drop down anywhere in the world that I wanted. That was a great imagination. In the same sense, I imagine having mom and dad at home. And I wish I could have, but I didn't. The life I've led would not be the way it was if I had. There's nothing more important than accepting the hand that you're dealt. Accepting what you are. And realize that everyone is important. Every race is unique and important. Every race is of value.
So, what makes this documentary important to me? Why am I sitting here talking about my life and my experiences? And it's not just one thing, it's many things. I don't believe that any child should be made to feel like they are not worthy. That somebody else, by virtue of their race, their financial status, is better than you. Because I always, from that time, when I was like 4 or 5 years old, called me a bad name and told me to go home. That was the first time I felt like, what's wrong with me? What's wrong with me? And then always having to prove myself, to prove that I'm worthy. I'm a human being. I have feelings. I have aspirations. Nobody should be made to feel like that. And not just, I'm not speaking just to folks who are biracial, because now it's not as big of an issue as it was when I was growing up. Because of integration, because of advances for Black people, Latinos, we're such a multicultural society. But it's not just the Blacks or, you know, the biracial kids of Black and white people that are made to feel sometimes unworthy. You got Latinos being discriminated against, Muslims. It is such a waste, and it's so unimportant, because at the end of the day, we're all human beings, and we all should be valued for the content of our heart, for what we can bring to this world. The differences, the cultural differences, add spice and vibrancy to this world. And it's just a bunch of mess. We spend all this time fighting and separating ourselves about something that's so unimportant. My mother, poor, Black, uneducated, but smart as a whip when it comes to common sense. She was assertive. She had a lot of get up and go. She knew how to talk to people. She knew how to dress and present herself. She got attention. And the thing that was most important to her in her life, and she used to say this to me and my older sister, she said, don't ever let anybody make you feel like you're a second-class citizen. And then my father, raised by Confederates, deep in the piney woods of East Texas. His mother probably would have had a stroke if she had known he had children by a Black woman. But the two of them together had something. And through them, here I am, and my brother. And we believe that we have had a rich and full life. We are very proud of the people that we've become. And everybody ought to feel, you know, acceptance and worthy of life, because we all are. It doesn't matter. And so I really want us to think about this stuff now, because it's crazy right now with what's going on. It's crazy, and it's not right, and it will not stand.